Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'll be reviewing the Reebok Nano X3. So 3 pros that I have with the Nano X3 is number one, the shoe's performance is pretty dang well rounded. So I liked the Nano X2. I thought it was a pretty versatile training shoe. However, it had a couple of shortcomings. For example, it broke really fast in rope climbs when doing CrossFit workouts, and also the upper was a little bit too spacious for certain foot anatomy, so you kind of felt like you were swimming in that model at times. Both of those issues have been fixed in the Nano X3, at least from what I can tell based off of my training so far and my review process, and I like the performance of this shoe as a whole. So for my heavier weight training sessions, this model has done well. The Float Ride Energy Foam is responsive yet stable, so when deadlifting up to 500 pounds, the shoe did a pretty good job. When squatting over 300, this model also performed pretty dang well. And then in the context of CrossFit, the Rope Pro Plus feature appears to be fixed. The midfoot is a lot more dense, and with this reworked upper construction, so we now have a flex weave upper, it doesn't seem like it's as prone to breaking down from abrasion and different forms of stress caused by rope. Now, that doesn't mean the shoe is going to be immune to rope climbs for everybody. However, I do think it's going to be a lot stronger in the context of specific CrossFit training than the Nano X1 and Nano X2 were. When it comes to versatile training and short runs, I also have enjoyed this shoe. I like that the upper hugs the foot a little bit more. It feels a little bit more athletic in my opinion, and the boot has been reworked so you don't have nearly as much rub, and you have a little bit more ankle support here with the lift and run chassis system. And that brings me to my second pro, which is the lift and run chassis system. Now, this is a subtle internal change with the Reebok Nano X3 from the Nano X2, and that it's essentially this TPU system here that wraps through the midfoot, around the heel, and then over here on the medial side of the midfoot, and then at the bottom, there's actually this little plate here. And I actually asked Reebok to send me this because I wanted to see it outside of the shoe. So what this essentially does, or is designed to do from what I can understand, is when you're lifting, this bottom part here actually compresses a little bit, so you get a little bit more stability, but then when you're jumping and doing short runs, this gives you a little bit more pop. And it took me a minute to realize the difference between how this model felt for jumping and short runs compared to the Nano X2, but you do start to feel it a little bit, and I do like that change in the shoe. It's very subtle, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and I also like how the chassis system gives you a little bit more ankle support and really locks down your ankle in the boot of this shoe. The third pro that I have with this shoe is I like the reworked upper construction. So I liked the knit in the Nano X2. I thought it was pretty aesthetic. It also breathed pretty well. However, it was a little spacious for certain foot anatomies, and it could stretch out over time. In this model, we now have a reworked flex weave upper. It hugs the foot a little bit more, so I like that because when you're doing multi-directional training, when you're doing broad jumps and jumping forward and putting stress into the front of the shoe, it hugs the foot a lot better, keeps you more in place, and I think it's going to be a step in the right direction for folks who want this model for more athletic style sessions, short runs, and I think if you do have a narrow or neutral with foot, this model will fit a lot more true. I'll talk more on the sizing of the shoe in my sizing section, but I like the reworked upper. I think it's a positive change, and it hugs the foot a little bit more true compared to the knit and the Reebok Nano X2. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the Nano X3. So 3 cons that I have with the Reebok Nano X3 include number 1, the lacing system, and we have some material overlap down here at the bottom of the midfoot. So the laces can run a smidge long if you're tightening this shoe a lot, and then also you start to get this overlap down here at the bottom of the midfoot. This has been an issue in prior Reebok Nano models. For example, the Reebok Nano 9 had this issue. It's not really a hindrance on performance, but it's not the most aesthetically pleasing. So if you have to tighten your shoe a ton, especially during the break-in process, I would say expect a little bit of overlap down here. Again, doesn't really impact performance, but it could be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing in my mind. The second con that I have with this shoe is that out of the box, expect them to run a little bit stiff. So we do have a reworked outsole. It gives this shoe, I think, a slightly stiffer construction, and also I think maybe the lift and run chassis system contributes to this, but after like a week or 2 of sessions, this shoe does break in, but it does run a little bit stiff. So when you put this shoe on, I would not expect them to have a ton of flexibility and articulation right away. So definitely expect some break-in period with this model. I do think the reworked upper and how it hugs the foot a little bit more true does help accelerate this process. But again, just forewarning, this model may feel a little bit stiff out of the box, and it'll take a couple of sessions to fully break in. The third con that I have with the Reebok Nano X3, and this is more of just a warning for folks who are getting this shoe for very specific types of workouts, is understanding that it's going to have some limitations. This model is a really well-rounded training shoe, but if you're like super focused on your barbell work and you're mainly investing in this shoe for deadlifts and squats, etc., then I would say you might want to find something that's a little bit more specific for your training needs, because with this model, you do have a decently high stack height. You have a 7mm heel to toe drop. So for things like deadlifts, this is not my favorite shoe, especially when working like with 1RMs or 2RM weight. So I would say be very conscious of that. And then also, if you want to shoot for longer distance runs, this is not going to be your shoe. So my third con isn't really a knock on the shoe. It's just understanding that this model will have its limitations. And while it is a very well-rounded training shoe, it's not necessarily going to be the best for very specific and certain types of trainings. And so that being said, if you are looking for shoes for a very specific type of training and you're not sure if the Reebok Nano X3 is right for what you do, drop a comment down below and I can help you accordingly. But overall, we have some minimal cons in the shoe thus far. I do think it's a step in the right direction for the Reebok Nano cross-training shoe line, but now let's talk about the performance of this model. To discuss the performance of the Nano X3, I'm going to break this section into a few different parts. I'll talk about the shoe's performance for lifting, CrossFit, versatile training, short runs, and daily wear. In the context of lifting, this model has performed exceptionally well. I would say expect it to feel very similar to the Nano X2, so if you wore that model and you like it for your lifting needs, then the Nano X3 should tick the lifting box pretty well for you. This model, once again, was stable enough for deadlifts up to 500 pounds. I've cleaned up to 275 pounds in the shoe and it was also stable enough. And when squatting well into the 300s, this model also performed pretty well. I think it will have some limitations as you get more niche with your training and with your intensities, but for most folks regarding lifting intensities, I think the Nano X3 should tick the box really well. The Float Ride Energy Foam gives you a nice level of stability, but it also feels pretty versatile as well. And you do have a nice level of traction with this reworked outsole. This outsole almost looks like it has like that Metasplit feature that older Reebok Nano models had. And so once this toe box breaks in, it does get a little bit more articulation too. So I do think that's a perk for lifting. You just have to get this shoe there first because again, it does run a little bit stiff. So again, for lifting, I think the Nano X3 should work plenty fine for most lifters and athletes. In the context of CrossFit, I also really enjoy this shoe, and that's for three key reasons. Number one, I like that Reebok fixed the rope climbing issue. At least thus far, I haven't yet to have any breakdown issues with the shoe. The upper seems a little bit more durable, and I haven't had that lipping issue that we got on the medial side of the shoe when J-Wrap climbing on the Nano X2 and Nano X1. It's just way more dense, which I think is an awesome thing for the longevity of the Nano X3 for CrossFit specific folks. I also like the reworked upper and how it hugs the foot. I think it'll be a little bit better for different foot anatomies because it will hug the foot a little bit more true. So in the context of different WODs, I don't think you're going to be sliding around in this model nearly as much if you felt like you were sliding around in the Nano X1 or Nano X2. The last thing to like about this model for CrossFit workouts is I do like its performance for short runs. So for WODs that blend heavier strength work, some plyos, and then also some short runs all together, I think this model can be a very viable option to explore because with that lift and run chassis system, you do get a slightly more lively feel. So when tackling quicker 400 meter and 800 meter runs in my workouts, this model felt pretty comfortable overall, and I think it should work for shorter distance runs that are programmed in WODs. When it comes to versatile training, I also thought this model performed pretty well. You get a nice level of responsiveness and springiness up here in the forefoot, and with that reworked upper, again, it does hug the foot a lot more. And with the lift and run chassis system, I do think you get a slight edge for certain plyometric contexts in this model. When it comes to shorter runs, this model does an okay job. So I would say probably cap your runs to like 1 or 2 miles at a time. I would not run more than 2 miles in the shoe. It runs a little bit stiff. You might find it uncomfortable, but for runs like 400 meter runs, 800 meter runs, or even a mile, the shoe does an okay job. And I think it can be a viable option for that context. I also like that the lift and run chassis system does give it a slightly more lively feel with short runs, especially at faster paces. So for example, when doing like 400 meter bouts on the Assault Runner, I noticed that a lot because when I'm running on the Assault Runner at faster paces, I tend to have a tiny bit more heel strike just based off the arc of the Assault Runner. And so in that context, I felt the lift and run chassis system kicking in a little bit more. It helped give this shoe a slightly more comfortable ride. So I could see this shoe being a good option for that context. And then also in the context of high rocks, I could also see this model being a pretty viable option for that competition and training context. It does a good job of blending all the different modalities together. And again, I think it can be a good shoe for that distance and pace of running. When it comes to daily wear, the shoe also does an okay job. To be quite honest, this is where I would actually take the Nano X2 over the Nano X3, and that's because of the aesthetics of the Nano X2, and also I do like a little bit more space in the upper. It does give the foot a slightly more spacious feel, but this model will definitely work for daily wear if you want to rock them for like longer walks and then wear them to the gym. But I would actually take the Nano X2 over this model, and that's the one area where I do think the Nano X2 might have the slight edge there. But overall, the Nano X3 I think is a stronger shoe and a step in the right direction for the Nano X2 cross-training shoe line. This model has fixed a couple of issues that I had with the prior two models, so I do like them as a very well-rounded, versatile training shoe. When it comes to the price of the Reebok Nano X3, you can expect to pay $140 USD. Now do note, this is the hype package colorway, so the limited edition colorway that came out a little bit earlier, and it comes in at $150 USD. Honestly, the limited edition makes it a little bit more pricey, but the construction is the exact same as the normal Nano X3, and it's nice to see that this price point hasn't increased like it did from the Nano X1 to the Nano X2, so $140 for the normal Nano X3. All right, so now let's answer the question, who should invest in the Reebok Nano X3? So I think if you're looking for a training shoe for lifting, CrossFit, versatile training, and short runs, the Nano X3 can be a good option to explore. So essentially, if you're somebody who likes to blend a bunch of different training modalities together on a weekly basis, I think the Nano X3 can be a viable option for your needs. Plus, if you liked the Nano X2, I think you'll like the Nano X3. It's a stronger shoe. It still carries over some of the Nano X2's features, but I think has upgraded a lot of the features that were issues in that model. And then conversely, if you didn't like the Nano X2 because you felt like the upper was a little too loose, I think you will resonate with the Nano X3, and it could be worth a shot if you didn't like the Nano X2. Now, who shouldn't invest in the Nano X3? I think if you're a lifter and athlete that likes a lot more articulation in your sole and you like a more minimalist feeling training shoe, you might not resonate with this shoe because again, it does run a little bit more stiff through the midfoot here. And then also, if you like lower drops in your training shoes, you might not resonate with this model as well. This shoe features a 7mm drop. You might want to look into a shoe with a 4 or 2mm drop or even a 0mm drop if you want a slightly flatter foot position while you're training. But overall, I do like the Nano X3. I'm really curious to see where the community lands with this shoe, but I think this is definitely one of the strongest Nano models of the last 3 years, or at least since like the 8, 9, and 10, which were also really great shoes in my opinion. So when it comes to the sizing and fit of the Reebok Nano X3, I think the shoe should fit a little bit more true to size compared to the Reebok Nano X2. In the Nano X2, a lot of athletes and lifters felt like they had to size down a half size. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case in this model, and so here are my thoughts on the sizing of the Nano X3. I think if you have a narrow width foot, you might want to size down a half size in the shoe still, just to play it safe. If you have a neutral width foot, you should be safe going true to size. Now, if you have a neutral width foot and you like an intentionally snugger fitting shoe, then size down a half size to play it safe. But I think for most neutral width feet, like myself, this model fits pretty dang true, and the upper hugs the foot a little bit more than the Reebok Nano X2s did. For wider feet, you should also be safe going true to size in this model. When you get this shoe, I would say expect the upper to fit a little bit more snug. The width is the exact same in my opinion compared to the Nano X2, so I don't think the true last construction regarding the width of the shoe has changed, but the upper does fit a little bit more true, and the flex weave will break in over time, so just expect a snugger fit out of the box with this model compared to the Nano X2. All right, now let's cover the weight, heel to toe drop, and insole in the Reebok Nano X3. For my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 13.8 ounces. This model still has a heel to toe drop of 7mm, and this model does have a thin foam removable insole. All right, now let's cover the construction of the Reebok Nano X3. Up here on the toe, we have an extended outsole layer that wraps up, and then we have a light internal toe guard here that wraps the entirety of the toe box. We have a flex weave upper in this model, so that wraps from the forefoot into the midfoot, and then we have some synthetic overlays through the midfoot back here to the heel. We also have that lift and run chassis system. That is this black TPU that wraps from the midfoot around the heel to the other midfoot over here on the medial side. Looking at the midsole construction, we have the Reebok Flow Ride Energy Foam that is consistent with the Reebok Nano X1 and Nano X2 that extends the entirety of the shoe. And then we still have that Rope Pro Plus feature here on the lateral and medial side of this model. This feature has been reworked. It's a lot more dense than the prior models. I have yet to have any breakdown issues with it. Granted, that doesn't mean the shoe is going to be immune and completely prone to breakdown issues, but I haven't had any issues right out of the gate like I have had with the last two Nano models. Looking at the midfoot and the lacing system, we have 6 core eyelets that wrap up with a 7th eyelet back here for lace lock. Again, we do have a little bit of material overlay down here at the bottom of the midfoot. That is if you're tightening this shoe a bunch and you have a narrower foot or you just like a tighter fit, I think you will have some overlay. The tongue is not gusseted, but we do have 2 external loops here to help give you security. I have yet to have any issues with the tongue moving in my workouts, so I don't think tongue security will be an issue for most folks. Looking at the boot, we do have a little bit of padding around the boot. I don't think you're gonna have nearly as much rub because the boot doesn't like jut in or come up that high. It does have a nice kind of lip to it, so I don't think you're gonna have nearly as much friction on the Achilles as you did in the last two models if you felt like you did have that. And then with this lift and run chassis system, it is a little bit more secure around the boot here. So you do get a little bit more ankle support, in my opinion, in the Nano X3 compared to the Nano X2. And again, that chassis system is this black TPU layer that wraps the entirety of this shoe. Looking at the outsole, we have a full rubber tread here. We do have like that split tech throughout the forefoot into the midfoot. I like how it does give the toe box a little bit more maneuverability as you break this shoe in. And then back here in the heel, you can almost kind of see how it kind of compresses a little bit when you push into it. That's again that lift and run chassis system. And then lastly, we do have a removable insole in this model that you can take out and swap with your own orthotic if you need to. But if you have additional questions on this shoe's construction, drop a comment down below. All right, y'all, that wraps up my review of the Reebok Nano X3. Overall, I have really enjoyed this shoe, and I'm super stoked to see where the community lands with the Nano X3 compared to the Nano X1 and Nano X2. To be quite honest, this shoe has been the first shoe in a few years from Reebok where I'm like, oh yeah, Reebok is back. So I'm stoked to hear what y'all's thoughts are on this model. If you have additional questions on this shoe regarding sizing or performance or how it will fit for your training needs, drop a comment down below and I'll gladly help you out, or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, drop a like on the video, drop a subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Also, yes, if you missed my last video, I did get a haircut. I went from that fit friend to now that finance friend. I look like a banker bro in New York City, but hopefully it doesn't look too unappealing for video. It's really interesting looking at myself in the camera right now. It's definitely different than what I've been used to over the last 2 years.